Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Mukesh English. This is Mukesh Soni. I have a few questions before I begin this poem. Question number one: what are the ideas of development that come to your mind when you think of modernity? Do you think the modernization and development have solved the problems of humanity? Let's try to find the answers of these questions by reading a famous poem titled Measurements by the famous poet Navakanta Barua. Navakanta Barua was born in 1926 in Nagaon district, Assam. He belongs to the new generation of poets in Assamese literature. He received the Sahitya Academy Award for Assamese literature in 1975. Now let's know about the poem. This poem is an extract from Dancing Earth, an anthology of poetry from the northeast India. It has been translated from Assamese into English by Dr. Bez Baruha. The poem has a good deal of influence of T.S. Eliot. It bears the influence of the European decadent culture, which reveals the inner crisis of the human soul through doubts, apprehensions, boredom, and frustration. In this poem, the poet Navakanta Baruha he talks about the city life in which man has to go through an endless process of measurements resulting into nothingness. The poem seems to begin with talking about stitching of clothing in a very materialistic sense, but in its deeper meanings, it gives philosophical and spiritual perspectives. Different kinds of metaphors have been used to clarify the situations of nothingness and barrenness. Now, let's know the theme of the poem. Measurements is a metaphorical poem that invites multiple interpretations. The poem can be read as the manifestation of the spirit of nationhood in the background of the reign of terror unleashed on the northeast India, especially on Assam, in the name of ethnic violence, communal tensions, and separatist movements. The poem's belonging for the stitching of a garment for men can be taken metaphorically as stitching of all the states, including the northeastern states, into the garment of one nation called India. This poem can be read as a lament on the emptiness of human existence. So now let's begin the poem. The poet says, "It is evening now. Let's go to the tailor's to get measured. Measurements of neck, chest, hands, and arms, measurements of the thumb. We shall give measurements of the palm and the heart, the entrails, the spleen, and the liver. Give count of hormones and love." So in these lines, the poem seems to begin with the stitching of clothing by a tailor in his shop. The narrator of the poem proposes to visit to the tailor shop to give measurements so that the tailor could stitch cloth that fits him or her. So the identity of the narrator is not disclosed here. The poet uses the first person plural pronoun we to address the narrator. The poem begins with a measurement of a person by a tailor and turns into deeper rendering of the inner crisis of the human soul. It takes a philosophical turn as the poem progresses into next stanzas. So, in these lines, the poet gives a measurement of the complete human body as if the clothing is being stitched not only for the outer body but also for the inner structure, our physiology, our inner structure of human beings. Now, in the next line, the poet says, let us give measurements of life, of this, that, and several things. Give only the measurements. We shall think of the stitching later on. For the time being, let's just give the measurements we can only give measurements. Now, in these lines, the poem takes a very metaphorical turn here. At the same time, these lines also remind the reader that what it began with the stitching of clothing is no longer a matter of concern. Means stitching of clothing is not much important. There are so many other things are important than the stitching of clothing. That is, the measurement is important. It shows that what one begins with never, what one begins with never finishes, and another new task is yet to be done, or any other task which started earlier also need to be dealt with. Therefore, people are caught into an endless series of work like measurements. Further, the poem shows the helplessness of human beings, that they can only give only measurements. So life has become so mechanical that it has made human life a complete failure in almost every sense. In the next lines, the poet says, we can only take reckonings. We shall record that suicides have swelled considerably. We shall give count of the letters in a speech, give count of the Christians in Arabia, just give measurements. So, this section of the poem discusses various kinds of complexities of human life in which men men seems to be very helpless. Again and again we find here the man is so helpless in those complex situations of human life. So example, people commit suicide as they do not find any way out of their problems and miseries. People have to measure every activity and actions that they perform. So they take very seriously any activity, any actions, whatever they do. Even the letters of one's speeches are to be measured. They take it so seriously that each and every letter of the speech is measured, calculated, examined. This seems too much of the mechanical way of living. Perhaps everything is just a process or a matter of measurements for the narrator. For the narrator, it's only and only and only measurements. Further, the poet says, these further the poet says, we shall think of the stitching later on. Only think, someone after us will measure anew, saying that our measurements were all wrong. Fresh, new measurements. When will someone stitch the garment to fit men? So these lines seem to describe the aimlessness, hollowness, emptiness of human existence, in which man does not have any control over the things happening around him. His destiny is predetermined. Everything is already set to happen. Man cannot change it. Therefore, he delays, he postpones taking any determined action against the stagnation, against the problems of his life. He will keep on postponing, and these problems will become the serious problems in his life. So, in these lines, the poem shows that all efforts made by us are futile, of no use. Facts are bound to change their meanings and context after a certain period of time. These lines also express the relativity of the truth and suggest that truth is not timeless. All human efforts are caught in an endless process and never reach to their completeness, to their completion. Truth and fact also lose their meaning and relevance in the modern times. So, the poem shows that all measurements of life are just an endless process. Really, there is no real measurement as such. There is not any final cloth that is better stitched to fit us. Everything is just a process without an end, a process without any meaning. Therefore, the poet ends the poem with a rhetorical question saying, when will someone stitch the garment to fit men? This rhetorical question perhaps refers to the pessimist attitude, a very negative attitude. Pessimist, nirashavadi, very pessimist attitude to life, and questions many issues like helplessness, procrastination, futility of human efforts, obscurity, mystery, and illusion. Let's sum up the whole poem in simple words. This poem can also be read as a critic of modern civilization. It critiques the idea of development and progress. As the day is moving from evening to night, the world is moving towards darkness in the name of development and progress. In the present times, everything is measured in economic terms, but no one is concerned about what to do with these measurements or how to stitch the garment for the nation with these measurements. Even the measurements done by earlier generation will be replaced by the next generation. That means to say that the generations will engage themselves only and only in measuring the progress of a society in the economic terms, but no one will ever think of stitching the garment called happiness. No one will ever think of stitching the garment called happiness that will fit all human beings. No one is really thinking about one central question. What is the central question? What should be the solution to achieve happiness? What should be the solution to achieve happiness? So, dear friends, this is how I have tried my best to summarize this poem titled Measurements. Thank you so much for watching. Dear friends, thank you so much for watching this video. You can reach me at mukeshenglish@gmail.com. Please do subscribe the channel, click on the like button for more videos on literature, workbook, pronunciation, grammar, communication skills, presentation skills, interview skills. Stay in tune with Mukesh English. Thank you once again.